My name is Tareth Peacock. It's a pleasure to be here for my inaugural presentation for the Flag Institute, and depending on how this goes, it might be my swan song as well. I've been a member of the Flag Institute since 2021 and have been creating online videos on YouTube since 2020 during lockdown, if any of you remember that. Different days back then. But my love for flags goes back, just to give a bit of history, way back to when I was at school, and astronomy, oddly enough, is where my love for this came from. And discovering the flags of Alaska, as it houses the constellation that makes up the plough, as we know, and the national flag of Australia, that includes the Southern Cross as well. It was always interesting to me that us here in the Northern Hemisphere would never see the Southern Cross unless we cross the equator. We're all familiar with national flags, which are powerful symbols of identity and belonging. But what about that of the humble flag? Do they carry the same weight? Are they relevant to our modern urban life? Today, we'll explore these questions by examining some unique city flags, mostly of the cities that I have visited around the world, delving into their history, culture, significance, and discussing how some of these symbols are used or indeed not used in their respective cities. There's just a small array of some of the city's flags. City flags are more than just colourful pieces of cloth. They're national and regional counterparts. They are symbols that encapsulate the history, culture, and identity of a place. Each flag tells a story, sometimes going back many centuries. Now, I'm not going to read through all of this, but I'll let you have a quick look. But these are some considerations that I found when discussing city flags as a whole, of what the community should be looking at and trying to understand, or indeed asking of some of their authorities when going through the process of city flags. But I'll come back to this slide much later. Before I start to explore some of these cities' flags, I want to take a moment to ponder the point about something I keep coming across when listening to people talk about city flags, that of civic pride. But what does that mean? Well, civic pride is that feeling of belonging in a place that one lives, a desire to make the place better to live and work, a yearning to enhance growth and be a part of a community. People's attitudes towards local authorities, sponsored events, grants, teams, sports, clubs, you name it, all trying to work to improve an environmental issue or indeed reduce crime. And a city flag can be a visual representation of that community's identity and help foster pride when done properly, providing tangible symbols that residents can rally around and make connections and promote a sense of belonging and shared history, especially when the flag incorporates meaningful imagery relating to the city's heritage and values. And it's this that I want to explore here, as I feel that some cities do this well and others don't do it as well, if at all. So, quick fire round to start off with. Warsaw in Poland. This is a very simple bicolour flag for the capital. They do incorporate occasionally their coat of arms as well. Now, the local buses and trams have adopted the colour, so you see it all over the city. And oddly enough, the taxis use the coat of arms. So therefore, the representation of the city flag is in front of everyone within the city, whether they realise it or not. Interesting point to note, though, that the sword-wielding maiden there was once a half-dragon, half-man, but over the centuries has morphed into a mermaid. So she's probably the resulting of the oldest original trans icon. But let's not go down that route. Moving on to Prague in Czechia, which oddly enough, yes, you might recognise this, is almost identical to Warsaw. And just having a look at that, the buses don't fall in line with how Warsaw did. These are Prague trams and buses, and their taxis, thankfully, don't use the ridiculous busy coat of arms. Don't worry, I'm not turning this presentation into a transport homage. I just simply was interested to note that two capital cities using the same colour schemes and how they embrace them very differently. Closer to home, the City of London, which we can see uses this St George's flag with a dagger in the canton, but its similarity to the England flag has resulted in its use being flown in just a few locations within the city square mile, which obviously isn't square and isn't a mile either, but the flag mostly appears in an official capacity. It borders the inner square mile, so when you enter the City of London, you may just see what's there on the far left, the dragon holding the shield. You'll also find variations of this flag appearing on bridges, gates, bollards, and mini police box if you look hard enough. But it's not something that, again, evokes civic pride, as I mentioned earlier. My thoughts about this are that if you're using the national flag as the basis of a city capital flag, you're missing out on the unique individuality of the city. And it should be evoking to most casual viewers who probably just think that this is the flag of England with a dagger in the top corner for good measure. Blue and white stripes of the imaginative flag of Tallinn in Estonia appears pretty much just on a few flags, whereas the imaginatively blue and white stripes of Podgorica in Montenegro also appears on mostly just a few flagpoles and nothing else, but also on their Millennium Bridge that is probably one of two interesting things to see in Podgorica. It's a lovely city. I have been, but it's a short weekend visit if you need to go. The grumpy face of Sarajevo waves formlessly outside of their city hall, and that's probably it. Maybe if it was a little cheerier, it might be adopted by a few more locals. It's obviously the green hills and rooftops, the castle and a bridge, but to me it looks like a flag for the manic depressive android Marvin from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy should be waving in a lackluster fashion, if you get that particular quote. A few other capital cities that I've visited where nothing more than just a few flags, fly or drain covers or an old plinth include the Monaco or Indonesia version of Vienna in Austria, the corporate logo of Brussels in Belgium, the pillars of Reykjavik in Iceland, Amman, Amman at the top there in the with its in Jordan with the capital city name written in Arabic. In the bottom there is St. Christopher of Vilnius in Lithuania, the Passant Lion of Valletta in Malta, the Elephant of Bangkok in Thailand, Polish-style swallowtail, Bratislava in Slovakia, and finally the Castle of Belgrade in Serbia. None of these have adopted the civic pride, as I mentioned earlier, and seldom seen around their respective capital cities. They just appear outside the odd building here and there. But one case study I wanted to delve into deeper is that of Hungary and Budapest specifically. In this coat of arms style on a white field with alternating red and green wolf teeth design made up of isosceles triangles there. Now, for those of you who weren't paying attention in maths, the isosceles triangle is a triangle with two sides of equal length. But as this is nothing specific to do with the flags, I thought I'd throw that in for good measure. The red, green and white is obviously for the national flag of Hungary itself, which makes perfect sense to me for a capital city flag design, the way that the City of London doesn't do well, in my opinion. Then in the middle there, we have the 1873 coat of arms slapped in the middle from showing the castle either side of the Danube River, on which the city sits, the top castle originally for the city of Pest, and the lower from Buda, which makes up the city's name. Clearly the other way around, because Pest Buda is a ridiculous name for any city, but you get the meaning. This flag was adopted back in 2011, and like most young teenagers, it prefers to stay silent and out of sight, as you rarely see it flying around any of the streets. But there's a particular interesting point on why I was focusing on this capital, and that's because of this 1930 city flag that they used. The red, yellow, green triband, as it was vastly more popular back then as a city flag than their current one, as it represented the removal of the Romanian occupation which had flown this particular flag, which, as you can see, is massively different. This 1930 version shows independence and brought the colours of red, yellow from Buda, and, to be fair, flag of Pest, which was blue, yellow and red tricolour, similar to that of the Romanians. But let's not get bogged down here. The locals wanted something different, so they swapped the blue for the green, as it shows here. This was until the Second World War, when the Soviets eventually gained control and all local and national flags were removed, until eventually this inspiring design was issued back in 1984. The Soviets even spelt the name Budapest in English for some reason. Once the Soviet era was behind them, they returned to this Romanian colours, obviously adopting the coat of arms in the middle for a couple of decades, until they ended up with, as we've seen, what we have today. Today's flag is more of a governmental council use and not used by locals in any real sense. There's no connect to their sports teams, schools, colleges, etc. Only the city council now uses a stylized version of the coat of arms. There's nothing there that links the city to its people, except it flies outside a few official governmental buildings. The point here is that while their city flag is reduced to a few buildings and parks, it was in fact this red, yellow, green 1930 flag that was vastly more popular at the time. That said, it looks very much like a national flag, obviously. Very little about the city itself apart from the colour schemes. But it's more popular than maybe if it had returned after the Soviet era. It may have held the story of the flag that came back twice after 2 occupations, giving a sense of local pride and achievement. But alas, obviously, we'll never know. But they're not the worst capital city that I've been to when it comes to flag. No, that glorious title goes to Helsinki in Finland. Now, this quirky little number, which to me isn't half bad. Firstly, it's a banner of arms, as it's based on the coat of arms, which some say dates back to the 1550s. But this design is based on a much more recent design, the one that harks back several hundred years. But the problem with this flag is that you won't find it anywhere in Helsinki. It doesn't fly outside shops, it's not outside resident buildings, it's certainly not flying outside government buildings either. You'll find it, however, on a few drain covers, but I've been told that staring at the ground isn't the best way to explore a city while on holiday. The best I could get also was on a shot glass, which I managed to buy and bring home with me. But why is it not used at all? Is it because the crown actually relates to the Swedish monarch and the boat is there to look at the ports, the trade routes to Estonia's capital city, Tallinn, just across the Gulf of Finland, and therefore doesn't encapsulate the meaning of the entire city? Whatever the reason no one flies it, the question that should be asked is, if that's the case, what's the point? Why bother with a city flag if no one even knows of its existence? If it's not used because you don't want to be tied down to shipping lanes or poncy Swedish headwear, maybe it's time for something new, something that people can definitely get behind for all the reasons I've mentioned earlier. In fact, because no one knows about this particular flag, the local authorities have actually come up with a logo for the city which various clubs and schools and charities, etc., can use. Makes you wonder that if they had to do this, they must really, and I mean really, hate their city flag to push people to sign up to this branding. But it's that appears on their healthcare services, schools, outdoor services. It's in the council's main drive to promote this and fall under this design banner. But this in itself makes an interesting point. If the local council feel there is a need for this services and indeed for local businesses to sign up and use, adopt and adapt these types of logos, surely this is just a modern take on what a city flag should have done if done properly. With a little more design though, surely they could have come up with something akin to what they have designed now, would be more fitting as a replacement flag, something that everyone can rally behind. And that is exactly what happened in Istanbul in Turkey, where the flag was taken from the city logo, and it was this design that now appears on the streets flapping in the wind. In 1969, the Istanbul Metropolitan Authority held a competition to design a new symbol for the city. So not a flag specifically, but a logo that could be used for all civic purposes. Almost a reverse way round of a design a flag competition. It was designed by graphic artist Metin Erdemit, and in the middle there it has 7 separate triangles to represent the 7 ancient hills on which Istanbul was founded. The minarets from the Hagia Sophia Mosque, as well as representing the minaret-laden skyline, and the city walls at the bottom there, which then split to show the Bosphorus River. As stated, the design is on numerous trams that run through the city, boat services, various government buildings, and indeed signposts. But that said, going back to the topic in hand, and where this design evokes civic pride, does it? Alas, no. The Turkish national flag is everywhere and therefore drowns out this symbol on every street corner, as the national flag is on people's homes, flying on their cars as if there's a world football tournament somewhere. It's in bazaars, it's in every park, waterway shops you can think of. You name it, there's the Turkish national flag. The city flag, or the design, doesn't really stand a chance. The best example I can come up with is if we cross the pond to the USA. There are a couple of cities there that have managed to do with their flag what Helsinki is trying to do with their new logo. First, let's take a look at what I think is the model city when it comes to flags, not only because they have a great design, but because of how it's incorporated into everyday life, that being the city of Chicago in the USA. Now, this is one city I haven't been to, but let's take a look. It's a simple design, meaningful red, white and blue, which arcs back to the good old USA, which we were talking about earlier. It was adopted in 1970. The blue stripes are for Lake Michigan and the Chicago River. The 3 white bands are for the city's geography of north, west and south side, and each star representing a major event for the city, those being Fort Dearborn, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the World Columbian Exposure of 1893, and the Century of Progress Exposition of 1933-34. A fifth star was to be added had the city played host to the 2016 Olympic Games. So how is the Chicago flag used? As you can see, it finds itself from everyday life, from food stands, souvenirs, police uniforms, and people generally have tattoos of this as well. Now, if people start tattooing a city flag onto themselves, it's because they love the design and where they live and come from. And if that doesn't scream civic pride, then I don't know what does. Oh, and Chicago's flag is actually a municipality, so it's not really a city. But you get the idea of how this flag is incorporated very much into everyday life. Moving on to a contemporary urban life, city flags have varying degrees of visibility and importance. Some cities, these flags are essential symbols of local identity, while in others, they may seem like relics of the past. But to bring this topic up to date, the first light flag of Syracuse, which was adopted only in 2023, is already making massive headway in the lives of everyday folk there. Designed by very proud Syracusan Eric Hart, who I've had the pleasure to get to know over the past year, created this simple yet effective and emotive design. It represents the local land, the people, hopes and their dreams. The six-pointed star symbolises the 6 nations of the local area, as well as the 6 historical names that Syracuse has been officially known by. The triangles make up the Onondaga Valley, orange for the sun, blue for the lakes and industry, white for the salt, sun and peace. And now the flag is utilised already in so many local ways, from merchandise to pride versions, cakes, cups, headwear, stickers, you name it. They've adapted it already for a community to rally round and behind. And I think the key is here. This flag has the essence and the ease of adaptability, and especially since the designer Eric was thinking about this when he came up with the design back in 2022 for the competition. He brought his original design alive, as well as the endless possibilities it could be used to represent the various groups within the city, as well as the city itself. Contrast that to poor old Helsinki, where the city flag isn't even recognised, let alone used. This raises the question of whether a flag can be relevant if it's not embraced by its residents. In Helsinki's case, the flag may hold historical value, but its role in today's life is negligible, if at all, compared to that of the national flag, for example. Timely, Narva's magazine, Vexillum issue 27, had an interesting article by Toby Nelson about city flags from the American perspective. It included a 2021 survey, which had some interesting statistics, which I've got there. 60% stating that they don't even know or indeed have an opinion about city flags, 7% being dissatisfied with their flags, and 25% who were satisfied with their city flags. And finally, at the bottom, and more in line with this topic about should cities have flags, 37% of yes, 16% no, and 47% probably couldn't care less at all. The article also mentions that the study found that people were more likely to prefer texts than flags to help identify it. They obviously haven't read Ted Kaye's Good Flag, Bad Flag pamphlet, or indeed understood what a flag is actually trying to do. Unless, of course, they think that these are good designs of flags from past. And unless someone tells me otherwise, I think both of these flags are designed by somebody who was from Britain. But let's move on before I get bogged down with that. Before I conclude, let's just hark back to these considerations that I originally put up and just answer these quickly one by one. So flags that can create and grow a local sense of identity and encourage unity within the city. As we've seen, Chicago and Syracuse, that absolutely does work. But the flags must be right, meaningful, adaptable, and work for the local community on so many levels. It can detract from a broader sense of identity and encourage independence from or threaten unity of a larger group. History tells us that obviously flags can be very emotive artifacts, but in today's world, I don't see that. For example, Luton, with its airport and its 1970s Arndale Centre, is it really going to try and break away from Bedfordshire, for example, just because of its flag, which Luton doesn't have, actually? This is just a council emblem, so it's a moot point. But you may get my meaning. In today's civic world, it's unlikely to evoke such an emotion. A whole city would want to remove itself from a county, region, or a state. The process of adopting a flag might take up city's resource and money, as would officially be used by the city. I get the money is short for local councils and cities, and the public as a whole probably feel that money can be spent on better things. And I totally get that. But investing in a city flag can create a lasting legacy, strengthen the city's brand, and make it more recognizable and attractive to visitors and potential investors. Overall, the benefits of adopting a city flag can far outweigh the costs of contributing to a stronger and more cohesive community. Having a flag for the sake of flags can result in places adopting ugly flags, which is that one, sorry. This is, of course, a very big possibility. I mean, look at this for a proposal of, well, I'm guessing it's Blackstone in Virginia, but you tell me. The problem with trying to pull out a flag for a city just because they need one can result in some, well, as we've seen, especially in some of the American cities, some awful city flags. Every extra flag makes spaces used more crowded, makes it harder to find one that is both good looking and distinctive. Yes and no. When all flags are done right, each flag can stand on its own right. If we take the flag of Birmingham here, for example, which is within Warwickshire, which of course is part of England, which is also part of the UK, you potentially get these four flags flying together, each distinct enough to be recognised for what they're worth, and they don't drown each other out. But maybe that's because we're looking at it from a flag's lover's perspective, as opposed to some muggle who just sees flapping bits of cloth on a pole. Oh, and if we really wanted to go one further, as we're physically still part of a continent, we could fly this one as well for good measure. But anyway, in conclusion, city flags are more than just decorative symbols. They can be powerful representations of city identity, history, and community spirit. Their relevance in contemporary urban life varies. Some cities, like as we've seen, Chicago and Syracuse in the US, actively embrace their flags, while others, such as Vienna and Helsinki, seem to be more historical artifacts. The purpose of a city flag ultimately depends on the value its residents place on it. When embraced, a city flag can unite, inspire pride, and serve as visual representations of everything a city stands for. As we move forward, it's worth considering how these symbols can be utilized to foster a stronger sense of identity and community in our cities. The more I've delved into this topic, the more I found that the USA, when done properly, do it right. We in Europe, however, are either don't have the designs in place for us to rally to really get behind such an urban flag, or we simply just less concerned than our American cousins. Maybe it's just a cultural thing, who knows? Perhaps with a design such as Syracuse or Chicago, cities in Europe would feel a sense of pride and a want to fly such a flag. Do I think cities should have flags? As a vexillologist, yes, of course I do. But the flag has to be right. As we've discovered, it must have meaning, history, relevance to the local population, and not simply a city seal that's slapped onto a cloth. The right design with the right push initially from the authorities will eventually lead to people making it their own and incorporating it into everyday life, whether the schools, shops, colour schemes, local sports teams, whatever delivers a sense of civic pride that people can rally behind and leave the lion symbols, the detailed historic buildings, and the complicated heraldic cryptograms to official authorities' use and leave people with a design that they can be personalised and flown with joy. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of urban symbols and the roles of city flags. I hope it's given you a new approach to the city flag you see, or perhaps don't see, flying in your own cities. Thank you.